We're back and we're keeping going. Thank you for sticking around. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for being here. You're not going to be disappointed with this next panel, which is sort of flows from the CISA spotlight in that this panel is about working with the FBI and law enforcement, which has really changed dramatically over the last few years. I don't think there's anyone that would tell you different, the level of outreach. And so we've got the perfect panel for this. I'll get right into it. Starting off is Serrin Turner, a partner at Latham and Watkins. What makes Serrin ideal for this panel is not just that he cut his teeth as an AUSA in the Southern District of New York, the most elite, perhaps one of the most elite office of all U.S. attorneys' offices. He also served as lead cybercrime prosecutor, and his caseload included two massive and complex cyber prosecutions. First against Silk Road, that big online black market for illegal drugs and other contrabands. And second against Liberty Reserve, which was a multi-billion money laundering digital currency service, an underground bank for cyber criminals. And probably one of the reasons why they started doing ransomware was because if they started stealing information and selling it, Serrin was going to catch them. But it's also been reported Serrin is part of the team representing SolarWinds, which is really the first ever SEC proceeding to litigate cybersecurity disclosure issues. I love it when lawyers take on the SEC, Serrin, and in this case is truly a David versus Goliath situation, except to me, you're the Goliath. So I would switch it around. But I want to welcome you. Looking forward to hearing your take on all these new issues. So welcome, Serrin.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
And Kelly Langmesser, a managing director at FGS Global, where she helps clients manage external communications on security preparedness and after cyber attacks. And she's no stranger to intense situations. She's a superstar crisis manager, having spent 8 years as a spokeswoman for the FBI, where she handled communication strategy and media matters for major cyber criminal terrorism investigations in New York City. She's also had 2 special assignments at FBI headquarters, as the lead communication strategist for the cyber division and the foreign influence task force. And she cut her teeth as a technical writer for the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And this makes Kelly kind of a cross between Dana Scully from the X-Files and Lois Lane from the Daily Planet. So we really want to welcome Kelly here, and it's terrific to have her on. Welcome, Kelly.
Thanks, John.
And next up is Patrick McNally, a partner at Octillo, and an experienced incident response attorney focused on assisting businesses and organizations in their response to and recovery from cybersecurity incidents, especially ransomware attacks. What is Octillo? It's a 360-degree tech firm. In that one of the few firms in the U.S., we've got 3 people today from these kinds of firms with a recognized focus solely on data security and privacy compliance, incident response, and litigation. And he's a perfect example of the type of professionals you get at Octillo. He has a range of technical certifications and was even appointed by President Biden as executive secretary of the Export-Import Bank after working as President Biden's technology and data manager for voter protection. So that's a new kind of job. It's a new kind of firm. It makes Octillo kind of the Netflix of law firms, and Patrick the kind of the Lincoln lawyer of incident response. So welcome, Patrick. Good to have you.
Great to be here, John. Thank you.
And how could we have a panel without an actual FBI agent? And we picked a phenomenal one to be who's really part of a new cadre of FBI agents who specialize in cyber. Prior to beginning his career at cyber, Special Agent Douglas Domin was an incident responder at Sun Microsystems and supported Sun's enterprise server line and Solaris operating system. In his 20-year career with the FBI, Agent Domin has primarily worked on cyber investigations, both domestically and with law enforcement partners across the world. He worked in the cyber division as a program manager and led several cyber action teams at the FBI. Before that, he led and participated in numerous investigations across various programs at FBI Boston as a special agent, as a SWAT team operator, and a highly technically trained agent. Since 2016, he's pretty much put his master's in cybersecurity to work and focused exclusively on cyber intrusion matters in the Boston area, especially ransomware. To me, Special Agent Domin is the Johnny Utah from Point Break meets Spencer Reed from Criminal Minds. So thank you for your service, Special Agent Domin, and so great to have you on board and hear your insights. So I'll turn it over to Serrin. Have a great panel.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John, and welcome everybody. I thought we'd kick off the discussion by talking about the threat landscape and how it's evolving. I mean, so often, at least from my perspective, what people call ransomware events these days don't even really involve or focus on ransomware or encryptionware, but it's more these days about threats to disclose stolen data. So eager to hear the thoughts of the panel, and particularly Doug, in terms of what you're seeing with respect to threat actor tactics changing in terms of how they're exerting leverage, what sort of data they're targeting, et cetera. So Doug, I'll kick it to you to start us off.
Thanks, Serrin. Yeah, the threat landscape is our most common question I get, and so it's a good way to kick it off. I want to first just plug the CISA website. It's where we post the majority of our ongoing investigative materials and reporting is on the joint cybersecurity advisory website on CISA. So that's where you can see up-to-minute information that's being released by the FBI. Most recently, we've got a intel report on the Play ransomware group. We've got the AlphaV Black Cat ransomware group, and just this week they pushed out Androx Ghost malware variant. So that will include information about the threat, including TTPs and IOCs that you can plug into your firewall rules. But from a kind of a non official or reporting requirement, my day-to-day is speaking to victims of what you said, ransomware events. And we saw 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, ransomware was literally encrypting data on the network that was attached storage, gaining access from various means. Usually it's social engineering, phishing attempts, or brute forcing RDP ports that are left open. And we're seeing that encryption now kind of evolve into really just leveraging the knowledge they have about the victim entity, the company, whether it's the executive leadership or the board of directors. They're starting to get personal. They're targeting friends and family of those executive leadership individuals, and they're using tactics and techniques that I've seen for my 20 years in the FBI, swatting, online harassment, doxing, and they're making it a very personal impact to these individuals who are suffering not only a compromise in their organization, but now having to pivot and help their family and get personal with the threat actors. So unfortunately, law enforcement is always going to be in the kind of cat and mouse game of this. So we have techniques, and we're constantly trying to find ways that we can leverage our international partners, leverage our partners here in the U.S., whether it be federally or state and local, to mitigate and to help the victims manage and mitigate some of these threats.
Yeah, can I dig in a little further there? Because on the swatting element, or the personal element, I mean, that is a scary prospect. It's bad enough if a company's data is stolen, but if now individual executives have to worry about their own individual security or contact between bad actors and their family and friends. How do people protect against those sorts of individual threats? What sort of recommendations do you have?
Yeah, so I think first of all, the communication is key. If a company is if that's on the discussion table with the threat actor for swatting or harassing, I really want to encourage those that are involved to communicate that to the organization. One of the ways that we try to mitigate it, or at least to offer some advice, is to have those threatened victims contact their local police departments, let them know that this might be coming, that there has been some discussion, and that they work at an organization that may have been taken over by ransomware actors. Having that kind of communication with the non-emergency line at your local police department is a good first step. But again, the communication to the organization, understanding kind of what the first kind of line of defense is going to be with the executive leadership, getting the message out there that this is a threat that is real and that needs to get taken seriously is important for sure. We now have at the FBI, we have a JTTF, which we've had for decades, but the JTTF is taking on the kind of the main swatting threat now, and have established a list of potential subjects that are carrying out this kind of activity, and they're creating a good kind of discussion amongst state and local law enforcement to help the kind of the messaging, to let them know about things that we need to look for or listen to on the calls, to ensure that the response is appropriate when the swatting event does kind of get carried out.
And Kelly, how have you seen these threat actor changes, like changes in threat actor tactics, impact how victims of these cyber extortion attacks are communicating about the attacks, whether in the public or internally within a company?
Well, as John talked about, or Doug spoke about, their tactics are constantly evolving and they're getting more aggressive. And, companies need to be prepared to communicate across all audiences or all their important people to their organization. So their customers, their employees, their executive, their board, their investors, just especially those customers and employees, because we've seen threat actors literally sending an email to a victim company's customers saying, tell X company to pay us or do this, or sending a note to their employees saying, we have your data, tell your employer to pay us. And so it just shows that, the best line of defense in these, besides the cybersecurity, is to be prepared for this. And so companies need to take a step back before they're in a fog of, an incident, and say, who are our important stakeholders? Who are the groups that we need to communicate with? How do we want to talk to them? How do we talk to them? Are those channels going to be available for an incident? And then what are we going to say, what we're doing? So it's just really important to be prepared. And if you're not, be ready to respond to those 3 questions and communicate to them. So employees know not to click on that link, or a customer knows not to resend the bank account invoice number, reset the bank number. So really important to be prepared to communicate to those groups.
And Pat, what are you seeing from your perspective on the IR front with respect to changing tactics, increasing sophistication of these threat actors?
I think sophistication is a great word here, because we're really seeing the range of it. On one hand, you do have these very sophisticated groups who are able to target, just as Kelly and Doug mentioned, the specific clients or customers of a victim organization, try to really maximize the leverage, not just from stealing data, but from using these other tactics, whether it's something as dramatic as swatting or something as simple as a phone call to the main desk, or just emailing out to an employee listserv saying that this attack is happening. So it is so important to really focus on those great communications and preparation principles that Kelly mentioned, and to also realize that even at we've got the top end with the great sophisticated groups, and then we have a full range of other groups that are still out there on the ransomware bandwagon, who may be an affiliate of another organization coming in, encrypting data, and then may not be as, for lack of a better term, as professional as some of the other longstanding criminal groups that are out there, which can cause a lot of chaos, both in terms of your communication planning, understanding your notification obligations, and ultimately recovering from an attack. So we're really seeing a range from those very sophisticated groups maximizing leverage to other groups who are coming in and may not have a working decryptor, may not have a way to actually provide you an opportunity to get out of a ransomware attack, which is another great reason to reach out and to partner with the FBI so you can understand to the greatest extent possible who is the group we're dealing with, what are their common tactics, and what's my path forward to recovery?
Well, on that topic, Doug, I mean, in terms of the assistance that law enforcement can provide, I'd love for you to speak to what the FBI can sort of uniquely offer. Obviously, IR firms have their own threat intelligence they can provide. Ransomware negotiator firms have their threat intelligence. When explain to clients, like, what's in it for me and to bring in law enforcement, can you just elaborate on what the FBI can bring to bear in a ransomware situation?
Sure. So kind of getting away from the swatting threat, because I think that would be a little bit more of an immediate, again, we're talking a lot, all of us are talking about the communicative piece, getting in touch with each other, letting everyone know that this is an issue, whether it's the local PD or people in your organization. We can help message that. One of the strengths the FBI has, and we work with CISA and our federal partners on this, is just the global kind of reach to other law enforcement entities. So in a situation where there's swatting, or in the majority of our cyber investigations, I would say all of our cyber investigations, we're working with international partners. So my colleagues that work overseas in countries that we have a memorandum of understanding with, we're working with them shoulder to shoulder. We're traveling out there monthly to discuss updates and provide feedback and evidence on the subjects that we're investigating. So that's something that the FBI offers that is global and that is used in almost every case, is just our network of law enforcement partners. The other thing we've been very clearly kind of messaged from the top down is that we're to remain victim focused in every single engagement. So we do not want any victim to fear calling the FBI because they don't want a press release or evidence to get sent over to someone that they're not allowing or providing that authorization to be sent to. We are victim focused. Our paramount concern is getting the victim back up and running, getting their business operations back to 100% at the expense of an investigation is completely satisfactory as far as FBI management is concerned. So one of the things that we've offered in that kind of response and phone call is really some transparency in what we know about the threat actor that you might be messaging with or getting a threat from. We are essentially pushing back out details specific to the victims of these attacks to provide kind of the character of the threat, what we know about the threat, how mature the investigation is. There's various facts and kind of intelligence that we might be able to provide only to victims that'll help inform the decision makers and the stakeholders on kind of what their next step is going to be.
So, I mean, can you advise on things like, attribution, trying to figure out who this threat actor is, what the potential consequences are of engaging with a threat actor, how likely they are to, honor their word if they're paid. I mean, those sorts of practical questions that companies often have in these situations.
Absolutely. Exactly. Yep. Absolutely. So the way that the FBI has kind of tried to investigate the ransomware problem is that we've got a investigation opened on each variant and only in one FBI field office. So if you're attacked by a ransomware variant like Black Cat that I just mentioned earlier, that might be a case that we're working down in Florida. So we would have an initial talk here in Boston, but then I might have to get the subject matter experts involved on that threat in a phone call. So the local FBI is kind of your first point of contact. And then we can reach back to that threat team to provide specifically what you're looking for. And to your point, is this a quote unquote credible threat actor? Are they going to do what they say? I've seen some of the reports that threat actors promise to provide that are not very impressive, but after the payment's been made, you can't really get a return on that. So providing some kind of subjective information about what you can expect is what we're able to bring back to the victims.
And Pat, from your perspective, when you're counseling a client and advising them on whether to bring in the FBI, what do you tell them? Or what have you found sort of most useful in terms of the assistance you've got from law enforcement?
Absolutely. And I think the first thing that we communicate is exactly what Doug said, that the FBI really does take a victim-centered approach. We've had hundreds of cases where we've partnered with the FBI. There's never been one where any of the communications that we've passed over to them have ever become public, wherever the victim has been named. So the risk of it, we've always found, and we communicate to our clients, is very low. But on the positive side, there's so many opportunities to have that great technical information that can really help a forensic team get off to the races in terms of their investigation. We've had numerous examples where we've called the FBI and there's been either a flaw in the ransomware, a publicly available decryptor that is not known unless you are a victim of this particular type of ransomware, or a great example with such as Hive ransomware, where the FBI actually had access to specific decryption keys for victims and was working really their tails off. I know, as you know, Doug, to contact victims and to try to prevent impact from those ransomware attacks. So we try to tell the story of the successes we've had partnering with the FBI previously, and then do so in such a way where, of course, we're still taking into account attorney-client privilege and the confidentiality of information, but really working together with the FBI to hopefully reach the best possible outcome and provide as much information to help the investigations as possible at the same time.
And Kelly, how about from a PR perspective, what do you see as the benefits of going to law enforcement?
Well, when you take a step back to the ultimate communications goal for helping a company in a situation is to show a thoughtful, disciplined, and strategic approach to the incident happening. And they're trying to not inflict any harm on its reputation or its business or any position they have in potential litigation. And one of the things that we can communicate about that is that we are, like, an organization was a victim of an attack. And the first thing a victim of a crime does is you report it to law enforcement. And that step, you can easily communicate about with your stakeholders. We've had this attack. We report to law enforcement to get their help, to assist us to get this solved. So it's a great tool you can use. Noting that it also, you need to think about it as a whole with every person at the table who's helping the company respond, legal included, and the incident response team. Because if there's negotiations going on with the threat actor, the FBI might be involved, but you may not want to publicly communicate about that yet. So you might want to hold it back for a minute, until a later communication to say we're responding to it, but then at a later time we brought the FBI involved, or to help us, get back to right. So it's a very important tool a company can use.
And Serrin, I'll also say, we've got that primary objective of getting that victim back up in 100%. But the secondary victim, or the secondary objective, is really to find out who these folks are. You asked about the threat landscape. The threat landscape is exclusively human threats. This is what we're talking about. Despite the fact that they're using machines to attack each other and attack victims, these are human threats that law enforcement really has to get in front of and deter future criminals from taking advantage there. So.
Yeah, and it'd be great if you could just sort of talk to us at a little bit more granular level about like what an investigation like that looks like and what evidence you're able to collect, and what authorities you have, and maybe some success stories about takedowns that you've had recently and what the FBI has been able to learn as a result. Sure.
Just kind of a quick high level. You'd ask for granularity, but I'll try to just keep it high level, Serrin.
Not too much granularity.
These are long-term investigations. I mean, everything that we are using as evidence is not something that the FBI has in a back room or in a database that we can just go collect. We are purposefully seeking out and deliberately getting information and evidence from providers and from victims at the direction of our investigation. So we don't collect information. The FBI doesn't have authorities to just collect everything just to collect it and keep it for our own intel purposes. We have to deliberately go out and seek it, and that is done with either consent from a victim or a witness, or from legal process that we obtain with our U.S. Attorney's Office. And serve that on providers, both domestic, and then we also use that network, our law enforcement network, to serve that overseas at international partners. That is a long-term and very resource intensive process, because we are identifying new leads, getting information out, receiving information, and then commingling that with what we've already got in our holdings. In addition, we are covering leads that might happen and need to get covered here in Boston for other investigations. And so the day-to-day is kind of keeping up with what's happening from a national perspective, but then also progressing your own cases from the field office with your U.S. Attorney's Office to maybe get traction and learn additional information about the threat actors. So once we have identified individuals, as you saw with kind of the Hive ransomware takedown that occurred, I think this past summer, that's now become kind of the gold standard for how we want to do business. We want to be able to understand the threat, get access to what the subjects of that threat have and how they're operating, notify those victims that we may be aware of, and then ultimately take all that infrastructure down at one time and make that impact against a ransomware victim. If you haven't seen kind of the Hive ransomware, how that played out, I think that's become a playbook now for FBI investigations on what the gold standard is and what we are trying to accomplish in the field offices.
Yeah, and I just think it's worth emphasizing, everybody has their own sort of vantage point in this area, and the IR firms, work these cases over and over again themselves, and they see things from the victim's perspective. I mean, to me, like the special advantage you guys have is you're potentially able to actually get a hold of the threat actor's infrastructure, right? And learn a lot more about their operations. And that's a really valuable source of insight that you have. I did want to, there's a few questions coming into the queue, including one that's really relevant to what we've been talking about. In terms of the advice that FBI is able to provide, some companies are going to want to pay the ransom for various reasons. and they're going to want to understand as much as possible about the threat actors' likely response to negotiation moves. And in terms of questions like if we wait longer, if we try to push to negotiate, is the threat actor's demand likely to come down? I mean, is that something that the FBI is able to advise on, or are you able to sort of get that granular?
It's so specific to the threat. I'm reluctant to kind of offer tactics. We do have in some of these situations where there is a threat to life. So where there's a ransomware event that is going to impact or the safety of someone or threaten their life, we are essentially calling in the cavalry to help any FBI asset that we can think of, including our hostage negotiators and crisis management teams, to make sure that everyone is providing everything that we can do to support the victim. Where that's the case, we would bring on our FBI experts to negotiate with the cyber threat actors. So I can't speak to specifically what the tactic would be. I'm just not trained in that kind of negotiation, sir.
But in terms of sort of the historical evidence you've gathered about the threat actor, I mean, with respect to like particular threat actors, are you able to accumulate information about how this threat actor has responded in the past, and provide even just sort of informal advice based on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, exactly. That would be something that would be useful for a victim to know. Hey, we've spoken to 100 victims of this ransomware variant, and in 99% of these cases, they've come back and extorted you a second time.
Yeah.
So you may be reluctant to get quick to pay what they're asking. Yeah.
Yeah. So the threat actor behavior can really vary widely, but if there is threat intel that you have in a particular actor, you can pass that on. How about sanctions risk? One thing that companies are often very concerned about before paying a threat actor is whether there's any indication that it's a sanctioned entity. I'll throw this one to you, Pat. Can the FBI help out with that issue?
We've had lots of examples where we've engaged in conversations with the FBI where the FBI has first said, listen, it's our policy, and this is something we all agree with. We don't want to make payments to cyber criminals. We don't want to incentivize this. Of course, I think it's something that everyone can agree with. But I've also then heard the FBI say, but we understand it's a business decision, and that there's times where there may be an existential threat to your business where there's nothing else to do but to make that payment. And in those cases, we've had a lot of really productive conversations with special agents where they have said, we have no reason to believe that this particular group of cyber criminals is connected to a sanctioned group, country, or individual. That's been really helpful for us because, just being able to understand that in addition to performing all the other sanctions checks that, of course, we're going to go through, all the due diligence that we'll perform before that payment actually is going through, just knowing that the FBI can say, hey, we don't have information that this particular group is connected to a sanctioned group, that can give both the peace of mind to those of us helping with the incident response as well as the victim themselves. Because when you suffer a ransomware attack, the last thing that you want to do is to send that money off to some really bad folks who can use it for other terrible things in the future. So we've really appreciated the FBI's perspective on that.
If I could put on my FBI former spokesperson hat for a minute, one thing that I think Doug and Patrick have not brought up that's an important service that the FBI brings to victims of attacks is a victim specialist. And so as we were talking earlier about how the tactics are getting more aggressive and they're almost getting more personal, where they're contacting CEOs' families and saying, tell your dad to pay. There's a victim specialist that's assigned to, and Doug, jump in here, any victim of a federal crime that acts like a counselor and kind of walks into the process. And so you can bring that person in when someone is getting very aggressive text messages to their families and they are just really can't emotionally need a little support there. So it's another asset that they bring besides the entire law enforcement investigative angle.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a great point, Kelly. We have especially when it gets to that point, generally with the ransomware attacks, there is some communication with our victim witness specialist in Boston, but there will be an assignment of a victim witness spokesperson at the FBI for any victim who's identified in an FBI case. So that's a great point to bring up.
And Doug, when somebody does report a ransomware incident to you all, what sort of information and cooperation do you need? How disruptive is it? I mean, in one question where someone has expressed a worry about FBI coming to corporate offices, having it be very invisible within the corporation. How do you manage those concerns?
Thanks, Serrin. That's a great question and a concern of many. We rarely travel in person on the initial discussion. We are happy to have phone calls and to be brought into conference calls when it's appropriate for the victim and when it's convenient to do so. We can handle a lot of things through a secure file transfer application that we use, and that's kind of the initial triage. If there's a need, or like I mentioned, those threat to life situations, there most likely would be an element that is arriving in person. It would be coordinated with the victim, and they would not be surprised or see lights and sirens by any means out in their parking lot. It would be something that we would have to negotiate and coordinate with the victim and let them know that we were available to travel on site at their request. So that should not be a concern. And in most cases, the victims just want to have the conversation, learn what they can, and then move on with their incident response company and get things back up and running. And that can be all coordinated remotely via a phone call. And even dressing down is something has been requested of me before, which I'm always happy to do, Serrin. So.
And what about just sort of the technical information you need? I've had clients express concern. We're going to have to spend hours and hours digging for information to provide them. This is going to delay our incident response efforts. How extensive is the sort of the lead information that you need?
Yeah, well, Kelly brought up the point about kind of preparing for this to happen, having an incident response plan, and kind of walking through what that's going to look like, because we are going to need someone in that victim entity to be kind of hunting around for the evidence that we're requesting. However, as I mentioned, these are long-term investigations at the FBI. So if it's going to be a matter of 10 days, it's not really going to be a huge detriment to our investigation or case. Should that be an issue, or should there be something quickly we have to move on? We can ask for those things directly. Oftentimes what victims will do is they'll identify, patient zero. They'll set that aside. They'll have some notes. They'll provide us with kind of an initial dump of what they're looking at, whether it's IOCs with domains and IP addresses, or a ransom note, anything that's like a malware that's has to get analyzed. All that's going to be kind of handled downrange, but at a later time, as long as you're able to preserve it. What we're looking for are the things that we need to get going on, which are going to be communications accounts, domains, IP addresses, the things that will have kind of a short life cycle that we want to get in front of.
And Pat, I know sometimes companies are worried about waiving privilege when it comes to disclosing information to law enforcement. So what are your thoughts on that? How significant a risk is it? How companies mitigate it?
No, it's really an important conversation to have with victim organizations, but I think ultimately there's ways to do it. There's ways to share information with the FBI where you can still make sure that you're protecting attorney-client privilege when it comes to your legal analysis, your strategic determinations. And the easiest way to do it is really just to share those underlying facts, the IOCs, TTPs, the underlying facts that themselves would not be subject to attorney-client privilege, such as a suspicious IP address. Ultimately, sharing those details with the FBI is going to benefit their investigation and really not create any risk on the privilege front. Where we do always want to be cautious is the way that other regulators will approach and ask us about our conversations with the FBI. We like to keep a lot of the more strategic level conversations as part of verbal conversations and then share the technical details afterwards, because so frequently now, many regulators, whether that's a state attorney general or federal regulator like OCR, will ask, hey, have you communicated with the FBI? If so, tell us everything you told them. And those regulators may not have the same victim-centered approach that the FBI does. So that's where we do want to be cautious about the way we communicate information, creating that paper trail in case anyone else, whether that's a regulator or a litigant, asks us for that information at a later date.
And Kelly, I'd be interested in your perspective, putting on your former FBI hat. I mean, does the FBI ever communicate with those other sorts of regulators that may not be so victim friendly? I mean, is there any concern about the FBI turning around and and telling those regulators that somebody's been compromised?
No, and that's the thing is that the FBI, and you said the key word there is victim. And so the FBI is not going to out a victim to other regulators, and they're also not going to, out that victim to the world. The FBI's goal, as Doug touched on, is, helping the company, get back on their feet. The second goal is eventually putting handcuffs on a bad actor. And they want to preserve their case and they want it to move forward. And any, external leak or even naming their name in the press release is not going to benefit that end goal. I think we've all read press releases, Serrin, you used to write them, or the court docs that say like company A, reported this incident, and that's how they're going to name it unless a company outs themselves first. I think there's a great example of that a few years ago, not a ransomware incident, but it was a cyber breach, was Capital One. They, post-market sent out their release. We had a cyber attack. A few minutes later, DOJ put out their release. We've made an arrest for a cyber, attack against Capital One. So again, they're working together with those, companies so that they can, communicate to the stakeholders and get the information out who needs to get it out.
And Doug, let's talk about mechanics in terms of how companies should contact the FBI. We have a question here about, should companies like have a pre-existing relationship with the FBI? Does that help? Is it necessary?
Yeah, always good to have a kind of a local FBI contact. The position you'd want to look for is the supervisor of the cyber task force. That'll be the individual that you'll want to make that first phone call to. More than likely, like I do, I'll assign an agent to have that initial call. Sometimes our intel analysts and our kind of more tactical analysts are able to engage in those calls depending on their subject matter expertise. But you'll want to get in touch and proactively know who that supervisor is of the cyber task force.
And you mean the local task force in the company's area?
Yes. Yep. So 56 field offices throughout the country, and each field office has a territory. If you go on to the FBI website and look at where your headquarters is located, it'll show you where that territory, what field office you want to communicate. At the end of the day, if you send an email to cywatch@fbi.gov, they'll be able to kind of make that connection if it's an emergency. But I would recommend proactively, visit the website at the FBI, figure out where your headquarters for your company is located, and make that connection. It's good because we do a lot of outreach. We might have an annual kind of a meet and greet with our squad once in a while, just to have a kind of a community around cybersecurity, law enforcement. And I know that the FBI squads will want that interaction, especially ahead of time, so that everyone kind of understands who they're talking to when they're going through this crisis.
Right. I would think that's a good thing to put in, like the company's incident response plan, right? The FBI contact that they've established a relationship with. What about online reporting? So if a company's hit with an incident, is there anywhere they should go to report it online?
Yeah, so IC3.gov is our main intake online. That's often where we get our ransomware complaints, and sometimes they're weeks old, but they're just reporting it to us for that for our own benefit of understanding what they've discovered and detected in their network. It's helpful if you let us know if you do or do not want the callback. Once that IC3 gets submitted, they action it to get sent directly to the supervisor of that squad. So it might take a 1 or 2 business days for us to get back to you. I would encourage everyone, if it's fast moving and you need the information right away, in parallel, make a phone call to your local FBI office, ask to speak to the cyber task force, and let them know, I already put an IC3 in. I just need to talk to someone because this thing is fast moving and we want some information right away.
One thing just to add on to the IC3 there, right? Of course, this is a ransomware forum, but a sort of shout out to the recovery asset team at the FBI. If your organization ever experiences a wire fraud, the IC3 report is really the best way to get to the specific FBI squad that handles wire frauds. And we've seen in many of our cases the ability to go back and claw back some of that money that has been misdirected, oftentimes through a business email compromise. So really, we've been very impressed with how the IC3 can assist companies, not necessarily in the ransomware context, but in that wire fraud context in a really direct manner.
Yeah, Doug, I mean, there have been situations where the FBI has been able to claw back ransom payments. And I've had clients ask whether, that is a possibility. Can you advise on sort of how likely that is in any given situation?
Sure. I guess just based on what I've seen, it's uncommon. I don't know where that falls legally with unlikely, but I would say it's uncommon to be able to get something back quickly. There are some situations where we are assisting other partners in the investigation and in kind of shared knowledge and intelligence about the threat actor. And in doing so, we might be able to leverage another law enforcement agency's investigation to maybe marry up with something we know and then move quickly on it. So it's all situation dependent. There's four really kind of platforms. As you asked for kind of a strategy earlier. We're looking for four different things, and we're going to investigate them in parallel. The communications amongst actors, the infrastructure they're using, the malware, and their financial network. And those four things are kind of the pillars for what we're looking to make progress on and investigate. So that financial piece, when it's available, we're always looking at that as kind of a way to impact the threat actors.
And should companies expect to sort of hear back any updates from you as you continue to investigate the threat actor they're dealing with?
If they're identified as a victim of the ransomware variant, there should be, as Kelly had mentioned, a victim witness specialist who's going to be able to keep them up to date on what proceedings are going to take place. You shouldn't expect kind of a week-to-week update, but I would imagine that the case agent will want to include those victims, not only the impact that was made, but the financial loss in their kind of statement and in their affidavits to the court to explain what kind of an impact and what the resources that were impacted that can be attributed to these threat actors. So there will be kind of an ongoing communication. In any of our cases, it's kind of a when that sentencing hearing is over, that's kind of the best time for an FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office to be able to speak to the victims, to kind of call that a win in most cases, and kind of have that time to share as showing that the justice has prevailed. So I know that that ongoing communication will take place. I just couldn't give you a exact
right. But I just want to make clear. I mean, that really only comes into play when you've made an arrest, right? I mean, typically you're not going to provide updates otherwise. Can you give a sense of, I mean, what are the chances that the actor will be caught? And these are exceedingly difficult investigations. Just sort of give a practical sense of, the chances that the bad guy's going to end up in cuffs at the end of the day.
Yeah. I think we're maturing our investigations. I mean, with the greater impact of ransomware, the greater resources that are put behind it from the government to investigate. And I think you're going to start seeing, as we did with Hive, as you saw with Black Cat a couple months ago, there's going to be this impact, and there's going to be these investigations that mature into results. I know we've got some in Boston that are on their way towards that result. And as we discussed, we're evolving with the criminals and with the threats to find techniques that we can use to attribute it. We haven't had as much success as I think any of us are happy with. We're not satisfied, and we're looking to get in front of these threats as quick as possible.
Just Bruce, you want to cut us off there? I just have one quick question from the audience. There's a question whether the FBI will only help U.S. entities, or if there's an affiliate, the U.S. affiliate of a foreign entity, will the FBI able to help in that situation?
Yeah, we would most likely work with the law enforcement in that country. So we would want that victim to report it to their local law enforcement, and then we would certainly help the U.S. Entity. For the FBI to be involved and investigate, there has to be a U.S. victim at the end of the day. So if there's U.S. employees, then we would be involved. But if the headquarters and the majority of that company is back in another country, would work with their law enforcement to make sure that they're apprised of it and part of the investigation.
Great. Well, I think we're at time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Serrin. And Pat, Kelly, Doug, thank you so much. Really appreciate your participation today.